Good day, sir and classmates. Today, I will going to discuss my report entitled Homer from Odyssey, Odysseus reaches Ithaca. The author's background, and let's talk about Homer. His name is Homer. He was studied as part of Greek education, and the legends within his work would influence Hellenistic culture, Roman culture, and far beyond. So that Homer's lasting legacy is that his work are studied this day. Composition and early translations. Scholars date the writing of the Odyssey to about 725 to 675 BCE. The poem was intended for oral performance. Some scholars consider that the two works were written by different authors. It is generally accepted that the poems were composed at some point around the late 8th or early 7th century BC. The Iliad and the Odyssey. Homer is the presumed author of the Iliad and the Odyssey, two hugely influential epic poems of ancient Greece. If Homer did in fact compose the works, he is one of the greatest literacy artists in the world. And through these poems, he affected Western standards and ideas. The name Homer, born in 8th century. His location is unknown. He died in Los Greece. His language is Homeric Greek. His works written, Odyssey and Iliad. His profession is artist and poet. His nationality is Greece. For you, who was Homer? The Greek poet Homer was born sometime between the 12th and 18th centuries BC, possibly somewhere on the coast of Asia Minor. He is famous for the epic poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey, which have had an enormous effect on Western culture, but very little is known about their alleged author. The Mystery of Homer. Homer is a mystery. The Greek epic poem credited with the enduring epic tales of the Iliad and the Odyssey is an enigma insofar as actual facts of his life go. Some scholars believe him to be one man. Others think these iconic stories were created by a group. A variation on the group idea stems from the fact that storytelling was an oral tradition and Homer compiled the stories, then recited them to memory. Homer's style, however, he was falls more in the category of minstrel poet or ballader, as opposed to a cultivated poet who is the product of a fervent literary moments, such as opposed to a cultivated poet who is the product of fervent literary moments such as Virgil or as Shakespeare. Where was Homer born? Much speculation surrounds when Homer was born because of the dearth of real information about him. Guesses at his birth date range from 750 BC all the way back to 1200 BC. The latter because the Iliad encompasses the story of the Trojan War, so some scholars have thought it fit to put the poet and chronicler near to the time of the actual event, but others believe that the poetic style of his work indicates a much later period. Greek historian Herodotus 484 to 425 BC, often called the father of history, placed Homer several centuries before himself around 850 BC. Part of the problem is that Homer lived before a chronological dating system was in place. The Olympic Games of classical Greece marked an epoch, with 776 BC as a starting point by which to measure out 4-year periods for the event. In short, it is difficult to give someone a birth date when he was born before there was a calendar. Where was Homer born? Once again, the exact location of Homer's birth cannot be pinpointed, although that doesn't stop scholars from trying. It has been identified as Ionia, Smyrna, or at any rate, on the coast of Asia Minor or the island of Chios, but 7 cities lay claim to Homer as their native son. There is some basis for some of these claims, however. The dialect that the Iliad and the Odyssey are written in is considered Asiatic Greek, specifically Ionic. The fact paired with frequent mentions of local phenomena such as strong winds blowing from the northwest from the direction of Thrace suggests scholars feel a familiarity with that region that could only mean Homer came from there. The dialect helps narrow down his lifespan by coinciding it with the development and usage of language. In general, but the Iliad and the Odyssey were so popular that this particular dialect became the norm for much Greek literature going forward. What was Homer like? Virtually every biographical aspect ascribed to Homer is derived entirely from his poems. Homer is thought to have been blind, based solely on a character in the Odyssey, a blind poet, minstrel, Demodocus, a long disquisition on how Demodocus was welcomed into a gathering and regaled the audience with music and epic tales of conflict and heroes to much praise, has been interpreted as Homer's hint as to what his own life was like. The background of a work. Scholars date the writing of the Odyssey to about 725 to 675 BCE. The poem was intended for oral performance. As with the Iliad, the poem is divided into 24 books. It follows the Greek hero Odysseus, king of Ithaca, and his journey home after the Trojan War. The Odyssey, written in 8th century before Common Era. The language that he used is Homeric Greek. The genre is epic poetry, and he published in English in 1614. The aspects in the social and political life in Homer times that are reflected in the Odyssey are the leadership and hierarchy. These are depicted by kings, warriors, and peasants who sometimes live an heroic simple life. The poem was intended for oral performance. The purpose of Homer's Odyssey, while the Odyssey is not told chronologically or from a single perspective. The poem is organized around single guile. Odysseus returned to his homeland of Ithaca, where he will defeat the rude suitors camped in his palace and reunite with his loyal wife Peace. If the Iliad is about strength, the Odyssey is about cunning, a difference that becomes apparent in the very first lines of the epics, whereas the Iliad tells the story of the reign of Achilles, the strongest hero in Greek army. The Odyssey focuses on a man of twists and turns. The difference between Virgil's and Aeneid and Homer's, the Iliad and Odyssey is both fixed. It is clear from the beginning that the role of the gods is to make Aeneas and Achilles fulfill their journey. The Iliad focuses on the end of the Trojan War as the damaging power, while the Aeneid is focused during the aftermath of the war and underlies the foundation for new civilization. What does every stanza convey? The Odyssey. 10 years have passed since the fall of Troy, and the Greek hero Odysseus still has not returned to his kingdom in Ithaca. a large and rowdy mob of suitors who have overrun Odysseus pillaged his land continued to court his wife, Penelope. He was remained faithful to Odysseus. Prince Telemachus, Odysseus' son, wants desperately to throw them out but does not have the confidence or experience to fight them. One suitor, Antonius, plans to assassinate the young prince, eliminating the only opposition to their dominion over the palace. Unknown to the suitors, Odysseus is still alive. The beautiful nymph Calypso, possessed by love for him, has imprisoned him on her island, Ogygia. He longs to return to his wife and son, but he has no ship or crew to help him escape. While the gods and goddesses of Mount Olympus debate Odysseus' future Athena, Odysseus' strongest supporter among the gods resolved to help Telemachus. Disguised as a friend of the prince's grandfather, Laertes, she convinces the prince to call a meeting of the assembly at which he reproaches the suitors. Athena also prepares him for a great journey to Pylos and Sparta, where the kings Nestor and Menelaus, Odysseus' companions during the war, inform him that Odysseus is alive and drop on Calypso's island. Telemachus makes plan to return home, while back in Athena, Antonius and the other suitors prepare an ambush to kill him when he reaches port. On Mount Olympus, Zeus sends Hermes to rescue Odysseus from Calypso. Hermes persuades Calypso to let Odysseus build a ship and leave. The homesick hero sets sail, but when Poseidon, god of the sea, finds him sailing home, he sends a storm to wreck Odysseus' ship. Poseidon has harbored a bitter grudge against Odysseus since the hero blinded his son, the Cyclops Polymypos. Earlier in his troubles, Athena intervenes to save Odysseus from Poseidon's wrath. A beleaguered king lands at Scheria, home of the Phaeacians, Nausicaa. The Phaeacian princess shows him to the royal palace, and Odysseus receives a warm welcome from the king and queen. When he identifies himself as Odysseus, his hosts who have heard of his exploits at Troy and stunned, they promise to give him safe passage to Ithaca. But first, they beg to hear the story of his adventures. Odysseus spends the night describing the fantastic chain of events leading up to his arrival on Calypso's island. He recounts his trip to the land of Pluto's Easters, his battle with Polyphemus the Cyclops, his journey into Hades to consult the prophet Tiresias, and his fight with the sea monsters Scylla. With his finishes his story. The Phaeacians return Odysseus to Ithaca, where he seeks out the hut of his faithful swineherd, Eumaeus. Though Athena has disguised Odysseus as a beggar, Eumaeus warmly receives and nourishes him in the hut. He soon encounters Telemachus, who has returned from Pylos and Sparta despite the suitors' ambush, and reveals to him his true identity. Odysseus and Telemachus devise a plan to massacre the suitors and regain control of. When Odysseus arrives at the palace the next day, still disguised as a beggar, he endures abuse and insults from the suitors. The only person who recognizes him is his old nurse, Euryclea, but she swears not to disclose his secret. Penelope takes an interest in this strange beggar, suspecting that he might be her long husband. Quiet, crafty, herself. Penelope organizes an archery contest the following day and promises to marry any man who can string Odysseus' great bow and fire an arrow through a row of 12 axes, a feat that only Odysseus has ever been able to accomplish. At the contest, each suitor tries to string the bow and fails. Odysseus steps up to the bow and fails. Odysseus steps up to the bow and, with little effort, fires an arrow through all 12 axes. He then thorns the bow on the suitors. He and Telemachus, assisted by a few faithful servants, kill every last suitor. Odysseus reveals himself to the entire palace and reunites with his loving Penelope. He travels to the outskirts of Ithaca to see his aging father, Laertes. They come under attack from the vengeful family members of the dead suitors, but Laertes, reinvigorated by his son's return, successfully kills Antonius' father and puts a stop to the attack. Zeus dispatches Athena to restore peace. With his power secure and his family reunited, Odysseus' long ordeal comes to an end. Who was the speaker of the poem? Odysseus. For the most part, it seems like Odysseus. The main character of Homer's Odyssey is the speaker of Canto I. The way he keeps using we at the beginning of the poem definitely suggests that the speaker is at last among Odysseus' crew. What is the tone and mode of the poem? Celebratory and nostalgic. The poet views the times in which the action is set as glorious and larger than life. The style of the author. The personification. Example, saying that clouds cried all day personifies the cloud because clouds do not literally cry. An example from the Odyssey is when read, now when the child of morning, rosy-fingered dawn, appeared, Telemachus rose and raised himself. Homer portrayed Odysseus as man of outstanding wisdom and shrewdness, eloquence, resourcefulness, courage, and endurance. Food, Penelope, efforts to delay remarriage is often seen as a symbol of marital fidelity to her husband, Odysseus. Odysseus' vow, a cunning, smart, and incredibly strong warrior, that is how Homer describes Odysseus. The wedding bed. The stability of the marriage between Odysseus and Penelope. The scar is symbolically important for it defines who he is and what he is. Beggar disguise symbolized to test the people of Ithaca and to see how they would show hospitality to a beggar. The island of Ithaca symbolizes home. Symbols of temptation, Circe, the lotus, the siren song, the cattle of sun. Homer intelligently uses imagery to paint dramatic pictures in the audience's mind. Throughout Book 9, Homer uses brilliant imagery to describe Odysseus' adventure with the Cyclops, Polyphemus. He also employs vivid imagery when describing the natural world. What is the conflict? Man versus society. Because the individual Telemachus is struggling for his rights in the face of society, the suitors, the people of Ithaca. Penelope struggles for her right not to marry someone she doesn't love, even though the people of Ithaca deserves a powerful ruler. And man versus fate. In the Odyssey, conflict is constantly present. Much of the conflict arises from the obstacles Odysseus faces returning danger of the sea and the challenges of temptations. Odysseus constantly battles the supernatural world so he can return home. Themes: the power of cunning over strength, the pitfalls of temptation, the tension between goals and obstacles, the mystery of separation, maturation as a journey, the cultural implications. The final part in the series about the Trojan War brings our shipwrecked hero, Odysseus, back home after 20 long years away. He arrives on June Rocky Island, Kingdom of Ithaca, disguised as a beggar and finds that his palace is full of suitors, wooing his wife, the faithful Queen Penelope. The island of Ithaca symbolizes home. There Odysseus can share his life with his beloved wife and son, enjoy the wealth that he has earned, eat the food of his youth, and even sleep in the bed that he built. Ithaca symbolizes the end of the journey, the goal of the mythic Greek. The cultural context of the Odyssey, like the Iliad. The Odyssey was composed primarily in the Ionic dialect of ancient Greek, which was spoken on the Aegean island and the coastal settlements of Asia Minor, now modern Turkey. Some scholars thus conclude that the poet hailed from somewhere in the Eastern Greek world.